Welcome back to Porch Poppin'. I'm DC Paul, here with Verite news reporter Rich Webster. Rich, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jimmy Duncan was convicted based on allegedly fabricated bite mark analysis, yet Louisiana wants to execute him anyway?
Yes, so our story focused on Jimmy Duncan. He was convicted in 1998 for the murder of his former girlfriend's 23-month-old daughter, Haley Olivo. Duncan has maintained his innocence all along, and there's been a lot of new evidence that has been uncovered recently that points to possibly he was not guilty of this crime. There was a hearing in September to see whether he's going to get a new trial, and a ruling on that is expected in the coming months. Now, one of the biggest changes in his case was the election of Jeff Landry. Jeff Landry is a staunch advocate of the death penalty, and one of the first things Landry did was expand the methods of execution to include nitrogen and also electrocution. Louisiana hadn't executed anyone since 2010 because they couldn't get the drugs for lethal injection. So for the very first time for Jimmy Duncan, he faces the very real threat of being executed.
Could you explain the key arguments from Duncan's defense team in challenging that conviction?
Sure. So the big thing is the involvement of these two notorious doctors from Mississippi, Dr. Stephen Hain and dentist Michael West. They have been basically accused throughout their career of lying, of actually manufacturing evidence. 9 of the people they helped convict, including 3 people that were sentenced to death, were later exonerated. The only evidence linking basically Jimmy Duncan to this crime were bite marks found on Haley's body. And there's a video that wasn't shown at the original trial showing dentist Michael West using a mold of Duncan's teeth to make these bite marks on the child's body. And that proved incredibly damning during the trial and helped the jury convict him and sentence him to death.
I read in your article that they are using testimony from a jailhouse informant, Michael Cruz. How important is his testimony?
Jimmy Duncan was arrested in 1993, briefly shared a jail cell with Michael Cruz. Michael Cruz claims that Jimmy Duncan confessed to the entire crime, and during the trial, he testified to that. And again, that was the only witness who basically heard allegedly from Duncan himself that, yes, I did this. Years later, Duncan's defense team tracked Cruz down, and Cruz admitted that Duncan never confessed to him. And then later, it was found out that Cruz, back in '93, wrote to the prosecutors and said, hey, listen, I'll give you this confession from this guy for obvious reasons. Maybe there's something I can do to help you, basically, if you help me.
This dentist you mentioned earlier, are there any other cases of his that have been looked at again or overturned?
Sure. Well, there was the 2 main cases, Kennedy Brewer and Levon Brooks in Mississippi. Both men were convicted of killing, in separate cases, 3-year-old girls. One of them was sentenced to death, the other to life. And just like in the Duncan case, West was accused of actually manufacturing bite marks on each of these people. They were later exonerated. Those are the 2 cases that kind of broke open the dam to show that these 2 doctors, Stephen Hain and Michael West, sort of, again, were accused of manufacturing evidence that destroyed a lot of lives.
So, Rich, are there any other significant legal or procedural issues in Duncan's case that could affect the outcome?
One of the other defenses that his team they testified into court in September was that during the original trial, evidence that Haley had suffered head fractures in the weeks leading up to her death that caused her to suffer seizures as well. So a couple weeks before she died, she was trying to reach a piggy bank on top of a chest of drawers. She tried to climb, the whole chest of drawers fell on top of her, and so she suffered a fracture. She spent a couple days in the hospital. They did a CT scan, saw that she had a skull fracture, and when she was leaving, the doctor specifically told them do not leave her unattended in a bathtub because she could suffer a seizure and drown. When she was left the hospital, she went to her grandparents for 2 weeks. She was given back to her mom and Jimmy Duncan the next day. She died in the bathtub. And so that evidence actually was not in the original trial because for some reason, the defense team and the prosecutors reached a deal to not present that at trial. So there's like 3 main pieces of evidence that the original jury was not shown. It was the video of the bite marks, the prison informant, and then this history of seizures that could have given the jury a lot of doubt as to whether he was guilty of this crime.
Oh, Rich, well, thank you for your in-depth coverage of this issue. To read Rich's full article, please visit us at veritenews.org.